There, I think we are on the webinar and we are on Facebook Live. It is 2 o'clock, so I guess we'll get going here with everybody. And let me see how many I have signed up. Right now I got 53 on the webinar that have signed in already. So, like I said, they're going to continue to sign in at 2 o'clock here.
Right.
So let me just start by welcoming those that are signing on. Please keep signing in. If it gets too full for the webinar, please just go right to the Facebook Live. My name is Cathy Dionne. I'm the Executive Director for the Autism Society of Maine. And I've been doing these series every Friday, and I've already had Jim on once before, and it was great. We had a great response from that. So I kind of already said, well, I need to have you come back. So I'm going to let Jim introduce himself to the group. So if you want to go ahead, Jim, that'd be great.
Okay. Hi, Jim Ball. I've been working in the field of autism specifically, but working with special needs kids for over 35 years now. So, wow. Long time. And I'm a board certified behavior analyst. And namely, I work with agencies, I work with school districts, I work with clinics on just bettering the lives of those, on the spectrum, in any way that I can. So my forte is mainly behavior. But it was interesting, Cathy. I mean, after, our last talk, with Christy Brown Laughlin and you and I chatting, I think I said on that webinar that I think families right now are getting into the groove. Some better than others, some with more resources than others, some are still struggling, but for a vast majority, at least in the ones that I've talked to and the states that I've talked to, they've got some kind of a routine going right now. And as we're looking at it, I mean, I don't know what's going on in Maine, but in most places that I work in, specifically New Jersey, they're talking virtual ESY, at this point. And I think their biggest concerns about getting into school next year is really the protective equipment, whether that's going to be available or not. Not necessarily that they don't have plans, but, they need the equipment to do that. And with a shortage, how's that going to impact? So having said all that, at that webinar that we had, last time with Cathy, I said that my fear is not now. My fear is when they go back. That's my fear. So right after the Autism Society of Maine's webinar, Christy and I put together a manual for families.
Oh, I love this idea.
Yeah, and when you sent the email today saying, well, a lot of people are asking about re-immersion back in school, we've already done it. It's now in a PDF version. Future Horizons is going to put it together. I'm going to get Cathy a copy for free, and it's going to be electronic, so she can get it out to all the families, and hopefully all of Maine, because it's not just for kids on the spectrum. It'll also look at other disability groups. Mm-hmm. Specifically those that are more challenged or with an intellectual disability or developmental delays, but also it's highlighted to also help those kids that are not going to their adult day programs. Oh, okay, yeah. How are they going to be re-immersed back in? Mm-hmm. So it sort of looks at both of those avenues. And what we did is we put it in a structure where there's a narrative that talks about 10 strategies. So we came up with 10 strategies that we think are going to be effective. So out of those 10 strategies, the first section is a narrative on explaining what that strategy is. And then from there, it goes into a parent checklist, and it's just bulleted out exactly how I do it. So it's, A, do B, do C, do D, and then repeat or something. It just tells you exactly how to do it, bullet it out for the family. And again, this is family specific, but it will impact schools. And when I get into how we put it together, you'll understand that. So that piece. And then the next piece is resources. And in the ebook, you can click on links and it'll take you right to sites that have social narratives. It'll take you right to sites that have video models. It'll take you right to sites that look at reinforcement procedures. So all of the different things that we talked about in strategies, it'll take you to sites to give you an example of what that might look like. And then it goes through, like I said, it goes through the 10 strategies and sort of highlights it all at the end, because this isn't for right now. I think parents should look at it. figure it out, because it's going to be ever changing. And I'm not quite sure, from at least the information I'm getting, and Kathy, you could correct me if I'm wrong in your state, but the way we roll school back out next year, I think it's either going to be state by state, or I don't feel there's going to be any real tangible federal guidelines to what to do. I think every state's going to do it differently, and it might even come down to counties or even school systems how they're going to do it. Because people are talking half days, people are talking every other day, people are talking virtual, people are talking getting rid of, PE, and not for good, but PE, library, music, and using those environments to be able to put kids in so that they're not next to each other.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen anything that's come out of some of the foreign countries that have reopened, but even there was a cute thing, on recess, where they put in 6-foot boxes, and when the kids went out for recess, they had to stay in that box.
Yeah.
We're
always trying to, think outside the box, so that's going to be hard.
Yeah, I mean, so what's that going to look like? So I think some of this will be dictated by exactly what your state mandates as to what's going to happen. But there is one section in it that I think all of you, and I think most of you probably are, and if you're educators, I'm sure you are through your virtual learning, especially for your kids that are more challenged. We have to get those kids used to wearing masks. We have to get those kids used to wearing gloves. We have to get those sensory needs done now, so that we have repetition over time, so that at the end, we're not trying to play catch up with these kids. Because I really do believe that there'll probably be a zero tolerance to this. And if the kid can't keep a mask on, I fear that they're going to have those kids at home, and they're going to continue to try to do virtual learning. And for our more challenged kids, it's a struggle. I mean, we know that already. It's a struggle for those kids and those families, and what resources they have. So, having said all that, go ahead.
The mask wearing would probably be something that, well, at least I'm hoping, would be temporary. It's not like we're looking at it for this long extended period, but until we know that, there's something out there to help protect us a little bit better. There is a couple of videos that we posted on our website about how to introduce the mask to children and what that looks like. So we do have a couple of those. Are you addressing that in your book that you just put together? Somebody is asking
Yes.
About the book. When is it coming out again?
Future Horizon, I'm going to have a PDF version of it that's going to be like, edited and everything, but not formatted, with a cover. And Temple Grandin right now is looking at it. I had a conversation with her, and she really was excited about it. So she wanted to see it. So she's going to write, I think, something for it in the beginning, but right now, what I'm going to offer you guys is I'm going to offer you guys a PDF copy for free that you can just use.
Okay.
Keep in mind that a lot of it has not been formatted. It's been edited. There should be no grammar issues. Everything should work in the book, but it's just not going to have all the bells and whistles of a cover and all, that
Just
stuff.
yeah. So people are asking, how do I get on a list for that? So, for me, if you're on this Zoom and you've registered through Zoom, we have your email. Just put a little, in the chat box, say, I'd like a copy, please. So if you could just click in and say, I'd like a copy, then we'll make sure that you get a copy. And if you're on Facebook, do the same thing in the comments. Just say, I'd like a copy. And that way we'll know, and we know who you are. And here they all come rolling in now. We're at 104 on the Zoom here. So then for Facebook Live, do the same thing. Please put that in the, I think that's the comment box. Just write, I'd like a copy. And then we'll make sure that you guys get a copy too. This is just really wonderful news, Jim, to have something and have a guide. I think that's what's been missing. We have connections with the Department of Education. I know there's a lot of teachers on the Zoom today and on Facebook, and with a lot of our families. And one of the big things for us is there's not been any real guide on how to do this, because it's never needed to be done. So this is good.
Well, what it breaks down to is the first strategy is schedule. So it's how to use a schedule, but it's also how to introduce it to your kid at the end, because for this, it's really going to be parent driven, but it can be staff facilitated. Because what I want is, when you find out, let's say in Maine, that you decide that September 8th is going to be your first day of school. So that's our first day of school. And you put a sticker on a calendar and highlight it that that's the first day. We're asking families, you know, depending on what they can and can't do, to go back 3 weeks or 2 weeks and start a schedule like the kid would have when they're going back to school. So if it's a half a day, then they get up at their normal time that they should be getting up, because right now, from what I gather with a lot of my kids, they're all sleeping in because they're up half the night, you know, so sleep patterns are off. But when we start this, you're going to start it on that day so that the kid got this morning routine, or she's got her morning routine. She gets up. If she takes a bus to school, then you're going to incorporate a video of taking a bus to school. Or if they walk to school, a video of kids walking to school. And then they start school, you know, and I'm not saying that they have to do all the work, but they should have from their current classrooms or the classrooms that they'll be going into, at least what the day might look like. So from 9 to 9:30 might be morning meeting, 9:30 to 10:30 might be work time, and blah, blah, blah as it goes along. The parents need to have that in their hands to know globally. I know a lot of people don't know specifically what they're going to be doing. I get that, but you can at least give timeframes, you know, because I want those kids the parents to incorporate as many demand situations in that time, because my fear is when the kid gets back that they're not going to have that many demands at home, and rightfully so, it's home, but school is going to quadruple those, you know, in a heartbeat. And our kids are not going to react well if they're not used to it at that time. So again, I'm not asking the parents from, you know, May 15th all the way, you know, until they go back in late August, early September, if they do. I'm just asking for that last 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 if they can. And then if Friday comes and it's a weekend, you would do what you normally do on a weekend. So we're trying to acclimate the kid back into something that's going to be normal routine. For a kid that goes to an adult services center, same thing. You know,
Yeah.
how do we get that going again?
I just to remind the people that are on Facebook, if you're putting in the comment box, I want a copy, we need your email. So we're going to send them out by email. So you need to give us your email on Facebook. And let me know when I can ask a couple of questions too. I've had a few people asking about, you know, certain things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
So I have one parent who's talking about how does she help with her child with anxiety. Let me just go back up and make sure. I was wondering how to deal with the student's anxiety about re-entry to school. Is that might be covered in that book, or?
It will be, and it also will look at the social narratives for that child.
Oh,
you
good.
know, and video models on what to do. Yeah, so it will. And it really, I mean, and any of those kinds of anxiety things, you know, you want to do the social narrative because that's the second strategy in the 10. And in that one, you know, really being factual about what's going to happen. Because if we know we're going back September 12th, then that's a fact. We're going back September 12th, you know. And I think you'll ease the child's anxiety by getting them back into that routine. Because after social narratives, we talk about video modeling. So, and for people who are doing virtual school, you know, if they start to reintroduce that prior to the kids going back, you can incorporate that into the schedule. And it makes total sense, you know, into the video model. And then the fourth strategy really looks at repetition. All right, how do you do it over and over and over again so that you get the kid into that place where they don't have a lot of anxiety, because now they can anticipate and they're going to understand exactly what it is they need to do to be safe and for everybody else to be safe when they go back to school. And then the fifth strategy really talks about a safe place or a safe person. And I would hope that for most of our families, you already have that in the environments that you're in. But if you don't, they need to be established, because you're going to go back to the same behavioral momentum pieces that you would have done prior with your child in school. And you're going to try to incorporate that at home as much as possible. And then the next one would be chaining. And when I say chaining, I mean chaining activities together. So if we know the kids are going to eat at their desk, you know, because that's been told to us through the school, then we're going to do that at home. That's going to be part of their schedule and routine. So trying to expose them to as much as possible. And then we really suggest, if possible, to have a video meeting with the staff so you can go over everything, because I would want my family, for my child, to have exactly what my schedule is going to look like when they get there, exactly what kind of reinforcement system or motivational system the kid was using. I was actually on a phone call today with a family that I've been working with for a while, and their little guy on the spectrum, you know, 9 years old, 10 years old, he's transitioning to middle school next year. So obviously he didn't get any kind of transition. and he's a gen ed kid, very, very bright kid, struggles like most of our kids, at the less challenged end of the spectrum, do socially. And he's having a blast at home because he doesn't have to be social. He's taking this very well. He gets to do everything online, which is exactly what he wants to do. And we were talking, and even mom's like, well, and I also modified his reinforcement system. So, and I'm like, that's fine. But when we get back to the 2 weeks before school, you're going to need to go back to that system, because if he's not used to it and the demand situations are not the same, we're going to see a lot of sparks in behavior. And again, I fear that that's also going to exclude a lot of our kids into some kind of virtual or homebound situation if behaviorally they come back and we're not able to help them to, reacclimate back into whatever this looks like, when it happens. So, but that's real critical. And we talked about it. She's like, oh, I'll go back to it now. I'm like, no. You got 3 more months, do what you're doing. It's working, and she's like, no, it's really working for us. I'm like, let it work. I'm like, but when we go back,
listening to, the way you just described it, and I'm glad we have some, whether they're teachers or ed techs that are joining us today. It's, to me, it's really important that we have these conversations now with our school district, because my concern, and I have voiced my concern with the Department of Education. I am trying to set up some sort of meeting with them, is that we're not going to be prepared for these kids to re-entry. It's not like your typically developing child where, yeah, we got to talk about a few things. It's a little more intense than that. So
Right.
having these conversations with the school before June happens, and then we're like, okay, see you later. It's summertime, is going to be, to me, is so important, because we want to make sure that not only do the teachers, the ed techs, but the parents, that everybody's understanding what this is going to look like, even though we kind of don't know yet what we're doing in the fall. I think we're, like many states, has not been decided. There's meetings happening all the time. There's things being thrown out there of, maybe some kids come in the morning, some kids come in the afternoon, maybe some kids come one day and then they do virtual the rest of the week.
Yep.
So yeah, and one of the other questions was, how do you get a child who is struggling with Zoom lessons? Is there any advice on how do you get that child to engage in that, or is,
Well, it depends on the attention, level of the individual, to what degree, even in school, would they have participated in an activity. I've actually working with a young man in a rural area of Indiana, and I would have never guessed it, but we put it together, and he would have been a kid. You start virtual school and do some kind of Zoom lesson, and I know for a fact they were going to lose him, and they didn't. He heard the teacher's voice. We put his favorite song on, so it would entice him to come into the meeting. So we played his song. He came to the table to look because he heard the song, and then he saw his teacher. And I have a video of it, and I'm going to use it in some of my presentations because the family was more than willing to let me. His face lit up when he saw her. Like, and this is a kid at first glance you'd have been like, he could care less. You know what I mean? But he really understood. And again, that's where we always have to assume competence with these kids. That's why if you think a social narrative is way over a kid's head, then just modify the language, but still give the same information, because they're gaining that information. They might not be able to articulate it to you right now, but they're gaining that information. Even the most toughest kids I've worked with, I mean, when you go through things like this, you find out, wow, okay, they really do understand things that I didn't really give them credit, that they were understanding.
They're always listening. And that's my whole thing. Cause I have an older child. So my son is 26 years old and he's nonverbal. He uses his iPad really well, and he can talk in sentences. And you think, because they're not paying attention, they're not looking at you, that they're just not there. Well, when they spit something out that you said, you're like, oh, he was listening.
I love when that happens too. I love when that happens.
So yeah, I think that's really great. So
and going back to that question too, the other piece is that, and this is tougher for the family, but it's also what they would earn for coming on to the Zoom meeting. So if you really want them to engage, then you have to do, again, depending on the age level or whatever, you have to do a first Zoom, then the iPad, or first Zoom and then the computer, or first Zoom and then something else. So that way you can get the kid or entice them. And again, don't beat yourself up at everybody else. I would do a lot of forward and backward chaining of it. So I would just bring the kid in maybe for the first 5-6 minutes, if you can get it, and then get them out before a behavior occurs where they can escape, and then just try to build up time. I mean, and that's about the best way to try to do it, right now, when the kids are home and families are struggling to figure out routines too, on what to do. So, and then
the routines is important. And I wanted to throw something in from something you said just a little bit earlier about talking about doing the schedules, the picture schedules, because Christy's joining me and she's getting her own hour at the end of the month on the 29th. And she's going to talk about that, about what does a schedule look like? How do you put it together? And I think we're throwing in some social stories. So this will just play in hand with everything. And because I'm not having a coffee with Kathy next Friday, but I'm going every other Friday now, and she's going to do her segment. So between you two putting the book together, her doing the thing, and this is just really wonderful news.
Right, and I hope I can get it to you by then. Like I said, Temple's looking at it today. She wants to see it, and we're going to take some of her suggestions if she has any. If not, she's gonna put a little blurb in the preface because she really felt strongly about it. Yeah. And so hopefully that'll happen this week. So then by the time you have Christy, you should have at least a clean copy before it goes to whatever they do, at the other end with Future Horizons. But you should have a clean copy that you'll be able to share with even those participants and these. And I'm trying, I'm not charging anything for it. They might do some paper copies that they might have to recoup some of the publishing costs. That's up to them. But from my perspective, this is something that her and I, after we, and you, Kathy, you get all the credit because it came after your talk. She was like, what do you want to do? I'm like, listen, I got time on my hands, and idle hands or what is the devil's workshop or whatever. I mean, I'm like, what am I going to do? I got to keep my brain active. And we just troubleshot it and did it and went through it. And it actually came out really, really good, if I do say so myself. I mean, but again, I want to get it to as many people as possible. So whoever gets it, please share with anybody you feel comfortable. Let your administration look at it. If you can get the State Department to send it out, I'd be more than happy for them to send it out to every school. The state of Texas is going to do it. The state of West Virginia is going to use it. So there are several places that they're going to get it out to as many families as possible.
Yeah. Well, my meeting that I'm really hoping to get with the Department of Education, we have one on the books, but it's so far out, and I'm just so adamant on it needs to happen earlier. I can't say enough that we need to start working on things as early as we can, because we know with these children that we have to go slow and small, in order to accomplish certain things. So the more time we can have with them. So I'd love to get it in their hands, and I'll pass that on to them. So all you teachers and ed techs out there, back us up and let them know this is great stuff to pass on. So.
Yeah, and I mean, again, look at it if you don't think it's appropriate, because I was actually talking to somebody yesterday, and next week I have a couple consults, virtual consults with some districts, and it's more for behaviorally disordered kids, much more than kids on the spectrum. But even for your BD kids, the behaviorally disordered children, that you might work with, this will work for your elementary kids. Yeah. So I mean, it might not work for your middle high school kids that are BD, but it really will look at the other one. So I think it's gonna. I mean, because let me just get to the last two strategies, because I'm sure people are, especially the OCD people like myself, who are like, we're only on 8, and where's 9 and 10? They're coming right now. But 9 is really, establishing routines in advance. So it's that simulation of a school day, and walks the family how to prepare for that, and actually, do it and build your virtual team. Because I think we talked about this the last time we got together, those families that it might be one parent and they might have 2 children on the spectrum, or 2 children with, a disability, or, and no real support in the house, building those virtual teams. Because if it's an English lesson that was supposed to be going on in the schedule, maybe, grandpa or grandma can come in and read the kid a story. and that could be that part. So there are ways to get around trying to simulate that day. And then the last one is really, just anticipating their sensory needs. So what do their sensory needs look like? And that's the one section that I would say to everybody to go to first, because that would be the one where I think a lot of those have to start. Because depending on, I was talking to a speech and language pathologist the other day, and she's like, in some of my therapies, I can't wear a mask because the kid's got to see my face, so she found a place that made ones that are see-through.
Yeah, the clear ones. The deaf
clear ones.
community. The deaf community.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And then you have the ones that are the shields, and who knows what's going to happen there, with shields. So I mean, there's so many unknowns. But I think as things start to, solidify themselves in your own state or own district, you'll figure out what those unknowns are and what we're going back to. And then you can then go back to establishing those routines in advance and simulating that day. What's it going to look like? Because even if you decide every other day and one day's virtual, then the kid would have his schedule or her schedule, and they would start one day where they're doing school at home, and then the next day they're on virtual. So it's setting that repetition in place so that the anxiety does go down, so that the kid isn't in a bad place when they get to the school. And then we have more and more behaviors based on the demand situations. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we have this kid that's out of control. And my fear is that they're just going to like, okay, we can't handle this, especially the way we're doing it now. And they don't have any recourse. Those kids will end up home. And that's the last place we want them at this point, because they've been home now, if you go March, April, May, June, July, August, and you guys are September, right?
Yeah, we start in September. Well, some of them will start at the end of August, but the majority will start
in September. So you're looking at almost 6 to 7 months out.
I know
that's a ton of time.
They left school, I think the second week of March is when things closed down here, like many others is when that happens. So
yep,
that's a long time for a child on the spectrum to be out of their routine. And then I guess one of the things about, people are asking to repeat some of the strategies too. And for the person who's looking at repeating some of the strategies, Jim is talking about a manual that him and Christy had put together that we're going to post and send you out a copy. So you'll get all of the strategies within this manual. And we're not sure when. You said it might be within another week or so, or?
Yep. I'm hoping that once we get everything back from Temple, it's all put together. Now, again, like I said, it's not going to be fancy. It's not going to have a nice cover. It's not going to, but it's got the basics and the bones, and that's what I want people to have, because I'm more worried about the families getting their hands on the resources and information, because, having worked with the Autism Society for such a long time as the national board chair, and I've been on their PPA, their panel of professional advisors, for years. I got introduced to them, 35 years ago when I started in the field. That was my go-to organization, was the Autism Society, and hopefully they're going to get it out to all of their affiliates, so that their affiliates can get it out to families and to school districts. So this is going to be pretty widely distributed. And again, we felt, Christy and I felt very strongly that it needed to go out for free. We just needed to do this, and Future Horizons was nice enough to do the formatting and everything. And like I said, they're probably going to do a copy, but the electronic version probably could be printed anyway. And for those families that don't have internet access, you can make a copy of it. And
we do that for free over here. We print many things for families and send it out. So and we'll, on top of getting it to people, we'll also have it probably posted on our website, so people can just download it that way. And so the Facebook people, if you're don't want to give your email addresses, then there'll be something on our website that when we get it, we'll make sure that it's posted and out there. It doesn't, like I say, the fanciness is not what they're looking for. They're looking for the information, because we get calls daily on, what happens when, or what should I be doing? So this is really going to be for most families, and doing it for free. Jim, thank you very much for you and Christy seeing that need and putting it together, because people do need guidance, and we don't have much that are guiding us, around these areas.
Well, and it's because of people like yourself. I mean, I've been around the Autism Society for such a long time that, that's always been my give back to the community was things that I could do for the Autism Society. So, and it all came out of your first coffee with
Yeah.
us.
I
So,
know.
so you
True.
need to take some credit in this too, because this was
Oh,
all spurred by you. Because right after we were done, we got on the phone call, Christy and I, and I'm like, what do let's do something, and
yeah.
let's do something with this, and she's like, all right, let's do it. So we did.
So I don't want you to forget to get back to the strategies. Did we go through them all, or?
And if for my anal people out there, I will just go through the 10 so at least they have them. The first one is scheduling or schedules. The second is going to talk about social narratives. The third is going to talk about video modeling. The fourth is going to talk about repetition. The fifth is going to talk about a safe place, safe person. The next is going to be chaining. Then 7 is video meeting with staff. 8 is reinforcement / motivational systems. 9 is establishing routines in advance and simulating a school day or work day. And then the last one is anticipating their sensory needs.
I think the sensory is so big in this, especially when you talk about if they're going to have to wear a mask. I wasn't even thinking that some schools were going to require that, but today I was talking to somebody and it was a day hab program, because a lot of our adults, the day treatment service programs have been closed. Some of them are still open,
Right.
but the ones that are reopening, we're talking about everybody has to wear a mask, and there's an anxiety around that with a lot of these adults. And
Yeah.
For my son, I know that he's tolerating. He puts a mask on when he's got to go walk through a store, like to his job, and then he gets in the back room, and then he's allowed to take it off. So we're doing
Right.
small steps, because he would never tolerate a mask for 6-7 hours. But when these walkthroughs are helping him, because he sees everybody wearing one. And somebody's asking online if you have any instructions for one-on-one instructions for a Zoom meeting with a preschooler, because that might look a little different. They're usually all over the place. So I don't know if you had any.
The pre-K stuff, I really, look at what they would have been doing around their circle times. So the Zoom meetings to me would be any of those group activities that you would have done with the child in advance. So if they've already been exposed. So, in the morning meeting, you go over the calendar, you go over a variety of things. I would simulate the same thing, for them, because you're not going to get one-to-one stuff done with a pre-K kid. They're not going to, but if you do video modeling, if you do Go Noodles, because you did those in class, or you got up and danced, or they heard music or favorite music, that'll entice them to at least come to the screen. But for those kids, my advice would be to do as many of the group activities as you were doing, because one-to-one time with that, unless somebody's right on top of them there, and then you're going to get meltdowns. It's just, and they're at home, so they don't understand the difference between home and school, because at school you're supposed to do this. And it was so funny. One of my kids, who I totally get, when he said it to me, he refused to come on stuff, and he was just like, no. He goes, I was told, a couple years ago by my mother that my job was school, and I do work at my job. I don't do work at home. And he was adamant about it. And I'm like, well, where are you going to go now? I mean, that was his rule. And how some of our kids can dig in on those.
Oh, yeah.
He was totally right. So what we tried with him, and you could also try with the pre-K kid, is behavioral momentum. We started out with activities that we knew he was going to love to do. And then we tried to incorporate the harder things or the tougher things as time went on. And we were getting more and more time with him online than we were. But we start out with things that we know are going to be highly motivating, and then slowly, re-immerse him into the things that are going to be a little bit tougher. So,
yeah.
But we're good.
I think that, those are all such valid points. And one of the other things I like to say this to a lot of parents, and just remember, your parents first, and you are
Right.
teachers second. None of us really, planned on being our child's teacher, and we were put into the realm of this whole pandemic thing and kind of trying to teach them mode. So So don't be too hard on yourself. You know, it
Right.
is tough, and I know how tough it is. And sometimes we just got to remind the schools that, you know, your child is not used to you being the teacher. And when that rule comes in and you're not my teacher.
Yeah. I mean, I was having a virtual happy hour with Ann Holmes from Eden, who formerly at Eden forever. She was my mentor, and Jamie Douglas, who was the director of their adult day program at Eden for years, and now is working with a small agency doing applied behavior analysis services for families in the home. And we were chatting, and we were talking about that exact piece, you know, with families, and how can we impact and really help them. And Jamie said something very interesting, and I've been pondering it, you know, for a long time. You know, we really need at this point, I think, during this, is to give the families permission to fail. It's okay to fail, because we all do, but it's okay, because I think we put so much pressure on our family. You got to do this. You know, it's okay, because sometimes it's not going to work. Sometimes you are going to fail. You know what? And we, like in everything else in life, we learn from our mistakes and we move on and we make it different, you know? And I think a lot of families just need to hear that it's okay. You know, it's okay.
One of the things that I also think about is, so we're getting them ready to go back to school, the reentry, we're looking at that piece. But I think we also need to think about when it does happen, we're there now, okay? So now we're in the school. We also need to remember that it's not gonna, how do I want to say, it's not going to increase like within the first week, we're going to be back up to our 30 hours. So we have to also at that end, can you talk a little bit about what that should look like once they're there? So we've got the plan, we've worked on things, we're in the school. The schools now have these plans in place. Maybe they might be one day here, half day here. How would they look at moving into the future of getting them more permanently there if they don't start out at least with their 30 hours?
Yeah.
Is usually.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think that's all going to come down to, you know, individual school districts, states, you know, whoever makes those decisions. But I think I always struggle, because sometimes I'm like, you know what, do you just rip it off and just deal with it, you know, or do you go slowly, you know, and wait, you know, that Band-Aid. And most of the time I'm of the ilk to, let's just jump in feet first and see what happens, and then deal with that, you know, because whatever happens, we'll deal, you know, we'll make adjustments and we'll figure it out. And those kids that don't do well, we know then maybe we just take a step back, and those are the kids we forward or backward chain into things. But I think for staff initially, you know, to stay sane in your own classroom, you know, depending on what the you know, circumstances are, you need to start with, again, not beating yourself up if you're not getting to all the work. Because to me, it's going back to square one. And in all the preschools I work in, when the kids first come in, you know, first day of their first year, and it's a bunch of 3 and 4 year olds that have never been in school before, I look at the staff and I'm like, don't worry about getting any work done right now. All we want to do is get them used to the schedule. Once they get used to the schedule, then we'll do it. So during work time, do things that they love to do, you know, make it a fun time. We're not going to go right into, you know, counting. We're not going to go right into reading or whatever it is. And I know that's IEP driven, but, you know, to me, it's get them back used to the schedule, back used to doing it, and then either forward chain them or backward chain them into start with a little work and then give them a little bit more of a break. You know, then add more work and then shorten the breaks. And staff knows their kids. I mean, you got, you know, parents and the staff know their kids. So understand, you know, I can push this kid a little bit faster, and you know what, this kid I can't push faster. So to me, it's all about just getting them used to the schedule through repetition, doing things that are fun, which is called behavioral momentum in the field, you know, and then incorporate things as they go on. So that's how I would immerse them back into my classroom if I was teaching.
I think that, you know, I do have a question here, or more of a statement, but it says something about what if you have individuals, some will refuse masks, some they can't maintain that 6 feet distance due to behavioral issues. Do we have any advice? Because, you know, there are some of the kids that, I mean, we were talking about this the other day. How do you tell 5-year-olds to be socially distanced, you know, and then add a 5-year-old who has autism on top of that? You know, are there any recommendations when it's coming to those behaviorally challenged and you can't maintain?
Yeah. Actually, I'm on a board of a private school in New Jersey. So I sit on their board of directors, and we had a directors meeting on Monday, and they were talking about the kids coming back, and they've got like 140 kids in their program and probably 210 staff, because these kids are pretty challenged. So I would say that 80% of the kids in their program have one-to-ones. Yeah. And we were talking about, okay, first of all, this kid has a one-to-one for a reason. You need to be within proximity, yet you can't be within 6 feet. So how do we do that? And that was really talking about protective equipment, like gloves, long sleeve shirts, the facial masks, because we were also talking about their behavioral teams. And, in that particular program, we have biters and spitters. And, how do we account for that? And I think at this point in time, nobody really has those answers. But if I had to guess, that's, we can do the normal thing. So you'd have reinforcement systems so they stay socially, isolated. You would have reinforcement systems and praise and give them, tangibles for, wearing the mask. So we know those things, but if it's not working, what are we going to do? And again, I go back to the comment I made before about the zero tolerance level. I think people are going to hold our kids' feet to the fire on those. And if they're not doing it, they're not, so we need to incorporate that, way in advance. But globally, I think it's all going to come down to the protective equipment that people are going to be required to wear in order to have these kids back in those environments. And that might be a little freaky too, because this kid's going to walk in and look at you, and if you have a mask on, he's not or she's not going to know your face. I sat next to Temple Grandin on an airplane, right next to her. Flew all the way from New Jersey to Portland, Maine, a couple of years ago. And when we got there, I offered her a ride to the hotel because she was getting a little anxious. So she goes, sure. She knew I was going, so we really didn't chat a lot. Got to the hotel. And Teresa Corey, who's one of the people that are Future Horizons, was there. Temple walks in and says hi. And then Temple goes, this nice guy gave me a ride. And I'm like, Temple, I looked at her, I'm like, Temple, I've known you forever. She goes, oh. And then she looks at Teresa and she's panicked. And Teresa goes, that's Jim Ball. She goes, did your face get fatter? Because she will tell you that she's got face blindness. Yeah. So put a mask on somebody, how are you going to know them?
What's your opinion on, I've seen this recently, and I do love this idea because, people are covering their whole face, of having a necklace or a lanyard that actually has their real face hanging.
Their real face on it. I like that. Yeah, I like that idea.
That way it identifies I also have somebody who's asking about, what about for the teachers whose kids are coming into their class, so they really haven't gotten to know those kids yet. Could we, and this would be a suggestion, when parents ask me this, I always say, try to get to know, if it's a new school, if it's a new teacher, if it's a new classroom, do that in the summertime. See if you have access to go in and check out the environment. So I'm wondering if there's a way for the teachers who know who their classrooms are going to be, is to start doing some Zooms so they can start to see their new person who they're going to have. So I'm not sure if that's a great suggestion or not, but
that is a great suggestion, because number 7 strategy in the workbook, we talk about that video meeting with staff, and especially for those that are going to have new teachers, new aides, support staff, speech, OT, PT, whatever. Those meetings to me are critical, because those classrooms are not going to look the same as the classroom they came from. So you need to get that schedule of what that's going to look like. So because their simulated school day is going to look totally different. The other thing to do too is, and you can go probably online and do this, unless there's been major changes to the environment, and I mean structurally the building, you probably could pull up videos of the auditorium, during some show that was there. You could pull up in the gymnasium, maybe the outside of the school, and do video models of, okay, this is the environment that you're going to go into. And you probably could pull those up from archived things that are already out there. And like I said, unless they totally refurbish the gym, that gym's probably looked the same for 20 years, So if you have a picture or anything of those, that would be a great way to introduce the kid to that new environment.
Yeah. So I have a couple other things that, are coming up here underneath the questions. And,
Yep.
and this one I just heard from today, and I'm not sure about that. What about the HVAC systems that are running in the school buildings? Do we need to have conversations around those? Have you heard anything about those, Jim, in your passing
I
by
have heard nothing.
there?
The only thing I've heard structurally is the maintenance people would have, and I might date myself for some people there. I apologize, because actually I've been so bored. I'm now watching the Flintstones, and I haven't watched the Flintstones since I was probably 7. So, but I'm sure if you remember Ghostbusters,
Yes.
those packs they wear, they're making those with sanitizer in them so that after like an OT session, you know, they would be able to go in, spray the environment, and then
That's what they're
leave, and
doing
then
in planes right now.
yeah. So in 5 minutes, you can get people in there right away. So that's one of those things that they're talking about when it comes to the actual environments. And I guess again the problem is getting those to the people who need them, because they're in shortage. So who gets them, who doesn't. What schools get them, what schools don't. And the private school I was talking about in New Jersey that I sit on their board, actually they ordered sanitizer like a month and a half or 2 months before this all went down, and they still don't have it yet, and it's on back order. So who knows if it's even going to be in when school would start. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's something they need to be working on this if they're thinking that far out. I mean, 3 months you should be able to get your products in and get that beefed up. I have, and this is a great one. I'm happy to. Somebody else already said kudos to this person. It's a bus driver wanting to know if there's anything that they could be thinking about and doing, and good for you for even, asking the question and being on this webinar. So do you have any advice for bus drivers who are?
Absolutely, because actually I had a conversation because I did last year. I had the great fortune to do a talk at the School Bus Association's meetings in Pennsylvania, and some schools have their own busing, and then others have corporations that they then contract with, and these were all contracted people. But I think the name of I didn't name it, they did, but it was like caring for the autistic rider, I think was the name of my talk. And it went over really, really well. I mean, we had a candid conversation about our kids. But I was supposed to do it this year, I think in 2 weeks in June, but obviously they've canceled the meeting to sit on a panel to talk about this. But yes, I mean, if we know bus routes in advance, and we can get pictures of people that they don't mind those pictures going out to kids so that they know who it might be and who the aid might be. And especially for those that are, on the special needs buses, how many kids are on that bus, figuring out in proximity where the aid should or shouldn't be, because sometimes they're sitting next to kids, because, some of the behavioral challenges. So looking at ways to help the child. And for those that, you could do it with, even, and again, assume competence in a lot of the kids, even mapping out what it looks like. So taking a map and saying, we live here and this is how we're going to go to school. So at least it's a visual, because you really can't do, because Kathy, what I would say usually is do a video model of it.
Yeah.
But we're not going to be able to. I mean, if they let you drive the bus around and take a video model of what that's going to look like, that would be ideal. But I'm not quite sure they're going to do that. But if they do, that would be wonderful. But if not, you can get a map maybe and show, how the kid's going to do it or get where they're going. And I would imagine that in the buses, masks are going to be required, and gloves are going to be required. I can't not think that that's not going to happen. And I don't even know, even for the gen ed kids, how are they going to keep them isolated? Because it would have to be almost every other seat, or third seat be 6 feet. I'm not quite sure of any of that. So
yeah. It's funny. I had on one of the other sessions that I've done on my Friday segments, I had a parent on, and she was talking about her daughter, and she was like, I can't go to school. I always get on the school bus. There's no school bus. So she would actually pretend she was a bus and go to in front of her room and say, come on, get in the back of the bus. And they would make the sound and go down the hallway back up. And then they would get to their spot where they would do, which I thought was
absolutely
a neat idea, because that's what she needed. She needed to know she was getting on a bus.
Yeah, and that's where, and we had talked about it earlier in the scheduling, that's where if the kid takes a bus, As soon as they get up and they do their breakfast or whatever, or lunch, I'd signify like maybe a horn or something and say, okay, the bus is here. And they go and sit in front of a computer and watch a bus drive to school.
What
You
about,
know?
I have this other parent who's asking a unique question. It's their son has epilepsy, and
Okay.
his seizure triggers is from odd mouth movements. Have you ever, I haven't heard of that myself, and
Right.
suggestions. I mean, I'm wondering if when they're wearing a mask, if that he doesn't get to see the mouth moving, or does he need to see the mouth moving because he's,
I was going to say, does he need to see the mouth moving?
yeah.
Well, then that would entail what we had talked about earlier, and people have found them, those clear ones, that a speech path would use,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
the face masks, so the kid can see the person's face. And I really like your idea of even that, that card of actual picture of the person, like their ID card or something, so that the kid has a visual to look at to know, oh, okay, that's who it is.
Yeah.
And some of our kids also just go by hearing, so they know the sound of your voice. So those kids, and I know some of these, they sound so simplistic, and I don't want to overgeneralize, because we're obviously talking about the kids that struggle in these areas, because there are going to be some kids that are going to put that mask on and they're going to be perfectly fine. We're not talking about that kid.
Right.
The kid that doesn't really need to see your face, because he or she already knows who you are from listening to you, smelling you.
Yep.
I have kids that know my smell. I mean, that's just how they react to things. And there. So those kids, we're not talking about those kids. These are all for those kids that maybe struggle a little bit more. But I think the routine of those 10 strategies, even with our kids that are more, less challenged on the spectrum and more able, it'll still benefit them, by going through that process.
Yeah. Somebody else is asking something about any ideas for some of these special purpose schools. I know here in Maine, and this is what I've heard, is that the special purpose schools, they were considered essential, so they could have stayed open during these segments, but I think most of them closed.
Oh, wow. Did they? Okay.
So these kids that are, a little bit more challenged, that are in a special school,
Right.
they've been home with their parents. And these are the parents that we end up, nobody calls us to say, hey, we're doing great. Thanks. How are you doing? We don't get those calls. We get the
Right.
calls where I'm struggling around this, or I'm not doing this. And, when you're on the phone with a parent, she has a kiddo that is in a special private purpose school, but he's home with her and he's in her face. I mean, I'm trying to talk to her and he's just right there. She's saying, he's having, 3 to 4 times a day aggressions. We're hoping that they're going to be opening in June, but I wonder if there's any, like this person's asking if there's any, any advice for these schools once these kids come back, because I'm wondering if they're going to see the most increased aggression.
Yeah, and hopefully if they're gonna start opening up in June, hopefully I can get this out to you guys sooner, because this would be perfect for them to use right now. I mean, unless your state is easing things, I don't foresee them going back in June. I mean, I'm surprised that they called them essential, because the only things most of the country did were obviously group home services.
Mm-hmm.
So kids that were living in group homes, obviously that was essential. And all the kids that I work with that are in group homes, those staff, a lot of them were sequestered, for a quarantine period and those types of things, if they could be, so, and the kids are doing fine. I mean, I FaceTime with a couple of them, and these kids are very, very significantly challenged.
Yeah.
And they do good. They see, they're doing great, because their day programs are closed, obviously. So, yeah. They're home, socially isolating as much as possible. So, but those schools, that's that meeting I was on was one of those types of schools. And, they're still struggling with, how to keep the kids away from each other, and I think that is going to come down to, what that protective equipment's going to look like. Because you've got to be on some of those kids, because it's just not safe if you're not, and it's not safe for them. It's not safe for the environment. It's not safe for the other people.
So another question, and this is, I'm not sure about this one myself, so I don't know if you'll know about this one, but should we be asking for C-19 safety policies as we think about the children going back? So what is the C-19 safety policies? Do you know what that is, Jim?
I do not.
I don't know. Kendra, you're the one that asking that. So her other questions were, will there be school policies put out by DOE, which I am hoping that DOE is going to come out with something. But what we've seen in our state is, the Department of Health and Human Services, both ODEs for, the adult population and the children's population, they have put it back out onto providers. And I think the Department of Education is doing the same thing. The guidance is going back out to districts. Each district can make their own rules. And I think we're hoping for more consistency, and that would be great if we could see something more. So, your manual would be great to be getting out there.
It's generic enough that whatever your district decides, if they're going to do it district by district or whatever your state decides, or your county decides. Are you guys a countywide school system, or are you just?
They're districts. So the schools are in districts, but we have 16 counties.
Okay, because a lot of places like West Virginia, they're all countywide school systems. So
we're districts.
Okay, so they'll have I think one policy that they're going to do throughout the whole state because it's easier in a countywide system. But in Jersey, there's 634 independent school districts. I mean, in that itty bitty state, there ain't that many school districts in the whole state of West Virginia. Because it's countywide and Jersey's district wide. So, I fear if they go school district by school district, they're just going to be wasting energy, time, resources, to come up with something that, they should have a team of people and experts, looking at, okay, how's this going to look so that it's at least somewhat uniform for everybody. You can make changes based on, where you're at. If you're in a rural situation or if you're in an urban situation, depending on logistics, you can do that. But it just boggles the mind that everybody's going to go in different ways and do different things, because then you really don't have a good baseline exactly what's working. Right. Because then you're just going to assume, and I hate to say this, but we do this a lot in systems. All of a sudden, if we don't know, it's just going to become commonplace. And I don't think a lot of these things have to stay forever. But if we don't know for a fact that if you take the mask off, none of your kids are going to get it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if we don't have good information and good data to support it, I fear that it'll just become commonplace and then everybody will just wear a mask. That's just going to be it. And
we just had somebody who commented that said the Maine DOE just released a protocol chart for reopening. So that's good news. So that should be on the Department of Education's website, and we'll try to post that too. Usually Tara will go in and try to post that because the DOE has a site that says COVID-19 and all the new policies and everything, and they have been posting a lot of things and pretty much putting it there. But again, everything comes back to local district, and when you have that type of, one district can do one thing and another district can do another thing. So we want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So that's great. And then somebody's posting about, I think, Mary, I think you raised your hand, and I'm so sorry, Mary. I have no idea what to do when people raise their hand in Zoom. So I apologize for that. I'm like, I don't know what to do with Mary. But
she has a question.
I know so Mary's saying, Dr. Ball's correct. Special purpose schools were not being deemed essential. Sorry, so that's misguided, but residential and behavioral health services. So they weren't being deemed essential. Sorry about that.
But in the state of North Carolina, because my daughter's a in-home therapist with little ones, they're essential. They're still going into homes. They're still seeing kids. They're still seeing kids at the clinic. So,
yeah, I think it's, I'm hoping that they can come up with something. And again, I'm looking at the most severely challenging children right now. Yep. I just know that what's happening now, 3 more months of no support is not going to be good for these families. So. Yeah, so
I agree. I agree.
Mary, for typing in the chat box, and I'll promise I'll try to figure out how to do a raised hand. Oh, it's getting tough learning how to use all this stuff. So we are coming on 3 o'clock. I thank everybody who joined us today. I think, Jim, every time you come on, people are just they're so eager for the information, and sharing is the best thing that we can do right now.
Right.
Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to?
I more so than ever in my career, and my career spans a very long time, I'm just happy we're talking about all these things.
Yeah.
We're talking about them. we're getting information out. It's ever changing. It's very fluid. We all know what we need to do, and the sooner the better for the kids that we work with, and what that looks like. Because I would be an advocate of getting our kids into school before you get neurotypical kids into school.
I would too. That's what I'd like to see happen. And that's kind of my conversation I want to have with the Department of Education. So. Yeah.
So, there are so many fluid things out there, but I'm just really encouraged that we're talking about it and everybody's talking about it. Yeah. So, and people like yourself who have influence at those levels, through the Autism Society of Maine, are critical, to the success of our kids and adults. So, just keep up the good work. And, after you get this, if you want to do another one of these down the road, I'd be more than happy, Kathy, for you to do it. So.
Oh, well, let me do a little poll real quick right here. So hang on a minute. Jim, now that you're saying that, everybody, right. You see a poll come up on your screen. If you'd like to answer the poll, that would be great. Go ahead and just click on it. I'm going to leave it open just for a few seconds. Jim, can you see the poll that came up or no?
Yeah, I can.
So I'm like going, oh, who would like to see Jim come back for more webinars?
I'm not sure.
So thank you. Should I end the poll or does it matter? Yeah, I'll just end the poll right now. I think that's funny. So we will share the results with everybody, which are at this point 68 of you.
100%. Woo-hoo!
Yes. So that's great. I think that I want to thank you, Jim, for your time and putting this manual or this guide together is so beneficial. Again, we'll post that on our website so people will have it. We'll send it out to the people who gave me. You
got people crawling behind you and stuff.
I was trying to get in here so she can, you know.
You can get in and show your face.
I know. Remember next Friday, we're not having a coffee with Kathy, but I will be back on the 29th with Christy, who's going to be doing everything about schedules, everything about how to put one together, and I think social stories too. So that one was going to be great, probably fit right in with what you and her have already done together.
Absolutely. And by then, hopefully by then you'll have that, draft copy of it, and it's got all the information in it. It's just not going to have all the bells and whistles. So.
Right. Well, good. Thank you, Jim. It's been another lovely hour.
Always.
And I don't care what you have in your cup, but I have coffee in mine.
Water. I have water.
He's got water.
Happy hours, and it's almost 3 o'clock.
There you go.